Hello, everybody. Michael Silber here, again, continuing our series of interviews with industry thought leaders. And today I'm really happy to be able to be speaking with Maia Schweizer, who's the CEO of CleanCo, based in Queensland. Prior to joining CleanCo, she has spent a number of years with Origin Energy, and prior to that was an associate partner, with McKinsey and Company. So welcome, Maia.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, Michael.
Glad to have you. I'm really intrigued by the whole concept of CleanCo, and I'm wondering if you could begin just giving us a bit of the origins of the company and what the mission of CleanCo is.
Yeah, sure thing. It's a pretty unique enterprise, actually. I've done a bit of research, and there's nothing quite like us with a portfolio and a mandate like ours that I've been able to find so far in my search around the world. So really, CleanCo is a government-owned generator based in Queensland, one of three. And we grew out of the summer of 2017, which for anybody who was in Queensland at the time or actually anywhere on the east coast of Australia, you might remember it was an extremely hot summer. And in addition to the high heat, which drives a lot of air conditioner use, for example, there were a number of other factors that really drove electricity prices really high that summer. And not just high, but kind of 10 times as high as they had been just a few years before, and over a sustained period of time, over almost 2 months, which really starts to hurt businesses that count on electricity. So that was really the initiation of CleanCo, was a desire to introduce more competition into the Queensland market and to put downward pressure on prices. But the reason that we look the way that we do, we could have been any random assortment of assets and fulfilled that purpose. The reason we're CleanCo is that we're also really an important step towards reaching the 50% renewable energy target that Queensland has committed to for 2030. And really, even beyond that, we have a role to play and a mandate in unlocking the energy transition for Queensland. We've seen how energy transition can go wrong, and yet if it's done right, it can unlock the next horizon of prosperity for the state and for the country more broadly. So really, if you step back and think in terms of decades rather than years, we know that the transition is happening. We know that renewable energy sources are now the lowest cost of new generation out there. And the decisions that we take now in the next few years will really determine, how comfortable or uncomfortable that transition is going to be. And we know that in Queensland, we have an incredible number of advantages on our side. We have incredible resources, renewable ones, but also ones in the ground. We have incredible minerals and metals. And so really, it feels like CleanCo has an opportunity and a mission really to unlock those abundant resources in Queensland and translate them into a globally competitive clean energy price that really enables industry and translates our incredible natural resources, our gifts, into the next horizon of sustainable growth and prosperity for all Queenslanders.
Thank you very much for that. So that said, what are your main areas of focus in terms of generation capability at CleanCo?
Yeah, great question. We know that, even today, Queensland literally leads the world in terms of solar penetration. So we have 1/3 of our households with solar on the roofs. And of course, we're now seeing industrial scale solar farms as well, which is fantastic. We also are very lucky with our wind profile across the state. We happen to have wind that blows when the sun doesn't shine, by and large. So it blows more in the early morning and more in the evening and less in the middle of the day. And so really, CleanCo's proposition is to take those profiles, the solar shape that goes like that and the wind shape that goes like that, stack them on top of each other and offer them to customers in a profile that they can actually use. If you're running a supermarket or a mine, you need 24/7 electricity, not just electricity when the sun is shining. And so really, we're looking at the right portfolio that blends solar and wind, and actually our foundation assets, which are super flexible. They're pumped hydro and a very efficient gas plant, as well as some run-of-river hydros in the north of the state. And really, when we stack all of those together, we get a nice smooth band of electricity that's actually usable to our customers, our big commercial and industrial customers. So I guess the short answer to that is we're really looking for any project that helps us build that portfolio. So It could be solar, it could be wind at the right price. Eventually, it's going to need to be firming as well to make sure we can fill in those gaps and have the reliable electricity even when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. And we know that if we do that well, we can actually offer a product that's kind of 90% lower emissions than the average across the national electricity market.
you've kind of addressed my next question, but I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on how what the creation of CleanCo means for, not only for Queensland, but for all of Australia.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a highly visible commitment to the energy transition, I think is probably the first thing I'd say. And then there's something probably pretty obvious, but I'll call it out just because it's really novel and really exciting as well, which is the very fact that we exist signifies a turning point. You know, we've known for a long time, several years at least, that solar is the cheapest form of new electricity. But that doesn't help you if you need to run your business 24/7. It only helps you in the middle of the day when the sun is shining. And so really what CleanCo signifies is that for the first time, we can now offer firmed, usable, reliable, clean energy at a price that's competitive with other sources, including coal. And that, you know, it's a really simple thing to say, but it is absolutely a game changer, because from now on, the cost curves for wind and solar keep on coming down, cost curves for batteries keep on coming down, and it just gets easier and easier to provide that cheap, plentiful, clean energy at, you know, globally competitive prices, making use of the incredible resources that we've got. So it really is a turning point. It's the first time where, without ongoing subsidy, that package of renewables with some firming has become competitive with coal. So it's really a milestone moment for Queensland and Australia.
Yeah, I agree. And you use the term game changer, and I agree with that. So what, following that, what structural changes do you see in the electricity industry, particularly as they relate to the transition, the energy transition?
Well, we have a few dynamics playing out, and I think one of the things that I'm really keen to preserve in CleanCo is the ability to be really nimble and agile and kind of keep up with developments in the market, because I think it's going to be a really interesting next 10 years ahead of us. So, you know, take as an example the incredible kind of falling cost curve for wind and solar. And we know that projects that would not have been economic even 5 years ago are now economic because wind turbines have gotten that much better, and our solar cells have gotten that much better. And so at what point does it become, for example, more valuable to have, you know, average wind and solar resources right next to where you're using electricity, as opposed to building a solar farm or a wind farm that's, you know, way out in the outback, but it has the very best 5% of wind in the state. At some point, as the cost curves come down, we're going to reach a tipping point. And at that point, I wonder, what does the energy ecosystem even look like? You know, are we actually a super connected highway full of transmission lines, or do we end up with these weakly connected islands where actually, you know, the uses of energy and the sources of energy are in much closer proximity to each other? And I think there's a smaller version of that playing out as well, in terms of, you know, do you have solar panels on your roof, or do you buy into a local solar farm that's done at scale? Do you have your own EV, and when do you charge it, and where do you charge it, and what does that do to our energy ecosystem? You know, so I think there's some really interesting kind of physical changes that will happen in our market in the next 10 years, and storage is a big part of that. You know, you can only have the islands where the uses and the sources of electricity are next to each other if you've got some way of smoothing out the bumps, which means either storage or some other kind of firming capacity. And that's an area where we're just at the beginning of the cost curve coming down. So it's going to be really dynamic over the next 10 years. And I guess the other thing is, you know, the markets that we're in will need to adapt as well. And we certainly see that happening now with a huge amount of proposed, you know, policy changes and regulatory changes that are in the pipeline. We'll need the market to evolve to keep up with the physical reality of how electricity is generated and distributed and used. So really, you know, it's hard to imagine a more dynamic industry at the moment. And in particular in Australia, we're right at the forefront of it in a lot of cases. So it's going to be, I think, pretty different 10 or 20 years from now than it is today.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great place to be operating in this business right now, because it really is almost like a lab for the introduction of renewable energy, isn't it?
We are the petri dish.
Right. So this might be a bit unfair, but what do you see as the energy mix in the next 5 years in Australia?
Well, you know, if you had asked me that a year ago, I'd probably have a different answer than now. You know, I think COVID has been a big X factor. And maybe just to break that down, because it may not be immediately obvious, what does COVID mean for the electricity sector? We've seen relatively modest decreases in demand associated with COVID. So unlike some of the European countries, which we were watching with interest, which saw 20 or 30 or 40% reductions in electricity use, we've seen nothing like that. And of course, that's because we haven't had the severity of shutdowns that Europe has had. But even just those, those couple of percent can make a big difference, and they're driving prices down significantly. And then we haven't actually seen much of a slowdown in the installation of solar, for example. And so we're seeing some new challenges, like in the middle of the day when all of that solar is contributing electricity, we often see negative prices. There's too much electricity being generated for the amount of use that we have. And it sounds, that's a big dynamic. It's been going on for a few years, but just those couple of percent from COVID actually make it significantly more serious of a challenge. And so I wonder if we are going to see capacity withdrawing from the market. I wonder if we're going to see a slowdown in renewable investment. Certainly, as cheap as renewables are to run in the long term, you've still got to you've got to seek a return on your capital up front. And so, are we going to see a slowdown of investment with really low electricity prices? And I guess the thing that's top of mind for that, and keeping an eye on that bigger picture, that really bright future that awaits us a couple decades out in a decarbonized world, is really how do we manage and plan this the best that we can? So if we are going to have capacity leaving the market, for example, how do we do that in a really planned way so that there are opportunities, for the people who work at our coal plants, for example, or there are new industries that we're promoting on the back of clean, cheap, plentiful energy that offer, good jobs and ongoing employment and opportunities to compensate for the ones that are leaving. That's something I think a lot about, and I know my peers are as well in Queensland.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. And my final question is, I'm sure people might find it odd to hear two Americans having an interview about the Australian market, but we are in one of the most exciting markets in the world. So can you tell us just a little bit about your personal journey, how you arrived at CleanCo in Australia?
Yeah,
or in
sure.
Australia, working at CleanCo is probably.
That's right. How did I end up with my absolute dream job, I think is the real question there. I started as a geologist way back when, so I was really curious to learn about the world, really curious to understand the dynamics governing the world around me, and always really engaged, I guess, in understanding and preserving the natural world. Probably goes hand in hand with that. Places with good rocks tend to be beautiful places. Mm-hmm. I guess at some point I was raised in an academic family, so I felt like I should learn a little bit about how the rest of the world works outside of academia. So I joined McKinsey as a management consultant and spent, 7 years working across 6 continents for energy and infrastructure companies, really trying to lift their strategic or operational performance. So really got an incredible kind of cross-section of a whole bunch of different cultures and companies and ways of doing business. And then I moved to Australia to work with Origin, and that was really the first time I got line accountability and a couple $2 billion a year to spend. And that was really all about, converting the kind of mega project delivery machine that had built APLNG successfully, the phase 1 project, this is the CSG to LNG project in Queensland, into a lean, nimble learning organization. And then I was taking a year off. I was actually doing a bunch of solo hiking across Tasmania and the Himalayas. And I got a call about CleanCo, and I was just, it just seemed too good to be true, the more I learned about it. And I guess, there's been a lot to learn. Electricity is a very complex ecosystem. And I think, our electricity market in Australia is literally one of the most volatile markets in the world. And so, there's been plenty to learn, but I've really found that those foundations in energy have helped me on the way. And partly it's understanding how complex systems work and all of that. But also, I don't think that gas or coal are evil. And I don't think that people who work in gas or coal are evil. I think most people, want to be proud of what they do. And the world has run on fossil fuels so far. And it's simply that now is the time to change fuels. And so it's on us and it's on companies like CleanCo to make that change, inclusive, appealing, and genuinely supportive of prosperity. And that, that makes it irresistible. So I'm so excited to be here and so excited to be in my dream job and, as part of this incredibly complex and rewarding environment.
It's great. It's great to hear somebody talking about their dream job and being in their dream job. So real pleasure to hear that. Hey, I wanted to thank you for your time today, Maia, and we're really looking forward to seeing you on our CEO panel at our live event, it's March 10th and 11th in Melbourne, and we'll see you there. And again, thanks for your time. Pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure. Thank you.